So let's talk about a webinar platform called LiveWebinar. I've noticed it's one of the most affordable webinar software out there. However, it comes with a few limitations that you should know about. In this review, we will cover the LiveWebinar registration page, the email reminders, the live webinar room, including the presentation tools and the audience interactions, the webinar follow-up, the analytics, and finally the pricing. So stick around and let's dive right in. So with LiveWebinar, you can host either private meetings or public webinars. The main difference between them is that during a webinar, only you as the host will be presenting. Also, there are many interaction tools available, like for example, the polls and the Q&A feature. So in this review, we will take a deeper look into the webinar features of LiveWebinar. So let's set up the webinar. Let's go to registration. So the registration page is basically where your attendees will sign up for your webinar. On LiveWebinar platform, there aren't many design options. It's basically just a registration form. However, you can set up custom questions there. So you can add different custom questions to the registration form, whatever you want to ask from your attendees before the webinar. This is a great chance for you to prepare for the webinar better for your specific set of attendees. You can choose different field types for the questions and make them required or optional. This is how the registration page and the registration form would look like for the attendee. As you can see, it's very minimalistic. It's eliminated all the distractions, so perhaps it's good for the registration conversion rate. After registering for the webinar, the attendee will be taken to the thank you page. What I like about this page is that there are the add to calendar buttons. When they add it to their calendar, it makes them more likely to actually attend your webinar, so it's good for the attendance rate. Let's come back to the webinar setup for a second. I always recommend to set up email reminders so you will maximize your webinar attendance rate. On LiveWebinar, you can set up the email reminders anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 days before the webinar. So I can set up an email reminder 1 hour prior to the webinar and 1 day before the webinar. So that's quite flexible. The funny thing here is that 1 day before the webinar converts to minutes. So that's quite it's accurate. Okay, 24 hours is 1,440 minutes, but it's quite confusing to look at. One downside for the email reminders is that there is no way to customize them. It's just a default reminder that gets sent out and you can't add a personal message to it. This is how the webinar email reminder would look like for the webinar attendee. As you can see, it's very straightforward, gives you the time and the link and when it's going to happen. I also like it that there is a straight add to calendar link. So that also maximizes the attendance rate because they can just easily add it to their calendars. So now let's check out the live webinar room, how it looks like for the host and how does the attendee experience it. What are the interaction tools and what are the presentation controls? So this is basically how the live webinar room would look like for the host in LiveWebinar. I'm currently sharing my webcam. It always appears on the top right here, and I'm sharing my screen, and on my screen I'm showing a PowerPoint presentation. Unfortunately, there is no way to launch the PowerPoint or the PDF presentation straight from the platform. You would have to always share your screen. If you want to show the presentation in full screen, you would have to run it on full screen on your computer all the time. So you can't really see the interactions and the chat if you are running your slideshow on full screen. The host can launch all sorts of interaction tools and presentation tools from the plus sign over here. Let's go through some of them. For example, you can use the whiteboard tool to illustrate some of your points and draw on the screen here. And there's also the YouTube video player. For example, I can share the YouTube video link over here and just play it for my attendees. The cool thing about launching videos on LiveWebinar is that I can seek to a specific point on the video, play the part that I want to show to my attendees, and just pause. So I can only show a short clip of a long video and just resume my presentation. I can resume it by pressing the tab. So all the presentation tools and all the interactions will be open in different tabs here. And as you switch through the tabs, it will also change what the attendee sees. So that's a really good feature for really directing the attendee focus. What should they be looking at? One cool feature that you can use to win back your audience's attention is the Presence Manager. Basically, it is a pop-up when the attendee has been inactive for a certain amount of minutes. It will just pop up a small notification asking if they're still attentive, and they have to click OK. You can also configure that if they get 2 to 3 warnings, they will be kicked out of the room for being inattentive. This is how the presence checker would look like for the attendee. They would have to click yes to confirm that they're actually still attentive. And this is how the whole webinar room would look like for the attendee. You'll immediately notice the chat option. They can send messages, they can add emojis and stuff like that. And they can add attachments, you can send files or voice messages. When the host launches a poll, it would appear like this for the attendee. I like it that it's on the big screen, so it immediately grabs the attention and they can just vote like this. And the voting will end when the host decides to end the vote. After the poll has finished and the host has decided to share the poll results, all the attendees will see the poll results like this. As a host, I can also launch an interaction called Vote Manager. It's similar to polls, but it's kind of ongoing. For example, it can be used to continuously check up on something. For example, if they can hear me or see me well. For the attendee, it would look like this. They just vote and it changes, and they can just change their vote as well. So it's pretty simple and always visible. Coming back to the host view, at a certain point in your webinar, you are going to make the offer, what you are selling. So for that, they have the call to action. And I have a pre-configured call to action here, and I can just send it to all my attendees. This is how the call to action would look like for all the attendees. The problem is that your presentation, your webinar is still ongoing, and they might want to resume the webinar to ask some additional questions. They're still on the fence, but the problem is that once they close this pop-up, there is no way to bring it back up again. Speaking of questions, LiveWebinar has a unique approach to the Q&A. So you can launch the Q&A with the presentation tab and the Q&A. Once the Q&A mode has been activated, all the attendees can request audio to actually speak their question, or request audio and video to show their face while they're asking the question as well. And each request should be approved by the host. Or they can just type their question in the chat. That also works. As a host, you will see each request to ask questions right here waiting for permission, and you can just approve them, and they will share their audio immediately with you and with all the attendees. All right, now let's talk about what happens after the webinar. All your webinar attendees would receive this type of thank you email after the webinar. The problem is that as a host, you can't customize this email, you can't attach the webinar slideshow to it, and you can't even add the webinar recording replay link to it. It's just an email to say, thank you for participating. That's it. The good thing is that as a host, you can still download the webinar replay recording video, or you can actually edit it right there on the platform. The webinar replay recording will actually capture all the chat and all the interactions that were going on during the webinar. And here you can trim the video, you can crop out sections, you can add your watermark to it. And actually, you can republish it as an evergreen webinar to make it more automatic to your attendees. The webinar analytics is one of the most important parts of a webinar platform, because you can use that data to learn and improve upon your next webinars. Unfortunately, on LiveWebinar, there is no analytics dashboard for you, but there is PDF and Excel reports that you can generate and download. Let's look at them. This right here is the LiveWebinar session report, PDF. So you can learn things like what devices did your attendees use. You can learn when exactly did they join, when did they leave your webinar, and you can compare it to your webinar recording. What exactly did you say to make them stay or make them leave? So you can learn and improve. There's also which content, which interactions did you share at what moment, and you can actually compare that to your attendance statistics here. Also, there is the divide between mobile and desktop devices, countries that they were joining, and what was the duration. Let's talk about the cost of LiveWebinar. As I mentioned earlier, the pricing here is really generous. First of all, there's a forever free package, but it's capped at 5 attendees, so it's mostly good for regular meetings. The Pro package is only $15 per month, which is the best deal I've seen on a webinar platform. It'll get you unlimited webinars with up to 100 attendees, 6 hours of recording time, and all the interaction tools that we've discussed. You can even host Evergreen webinars with the Pro package. They even have a 14-day free trial for all the packages. There's a link for LiveWebinar below in the description. Check it out if you feel like LiveWebinar could be a great, affordable webinar platform for you. And thank you for watching.